Good morning, everyone. This is Dr. Ramirez again. We're going to be talking about traditional and non-traditional models, but I went ahead and put in the slide right here, Constructivist, which is basically going all the way to the um, non-traditional models, because this is one that we advocate a lot in science education. But first, what we want to look at is something that we took a short look at during the last slide series, and that's the look between authoritarian versus non-authoritarian. And this slide basically has a list of places where different people go depending on where they are in the education system, going from authoritarian to non-authoritarian. And we'll look at those in just a little bit. But basically, one of the ways that I kind of look at this is saying, if we're talking about society, society has their thoughts and they have their beliefs about what should be taught in classrooms. So that's very authoritarian, and it moves down all the way to the classroom teacher. And you have this battle between being authoritarian and non-authoritarian throughout all of these different areas. Of course, one of the things that we need to do is, first of all, kind of look at the philosophical alignment. In other words, what's authoritarian and what's non-authoritarian, and look at some of the philosophical beliefs about each of these uh, areas, and then look specifically, and I've put here some examples of authoritarian and non-authoritarian. But basically, if you look, the first one is essentialism, which is a back to basics system. It's probably something that in your mind you have said that students need to know the basics of what they need to learn. That's essentialism. And we see it in the state of Texas when we use terms like TEX, the Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills. It's basically saying, okay, let's look at, these um, concepts and what is it that students really need to know. And the other one that's in the authoritarian is perennialism. And these are the universal truths. I know that when I was growing up, um, I read the Encyclopedia Britannica, just simply because I wanted to find out, well, what do other people think about and know? And, anytime I was um, concerned about a particular topic, I'd refer back to that particular book. And when I, was a parent or starting out as a parent, I bought what are called the great books, things like Aristotle and Newton and the readings, because in perennialism, the great books basically say there are people that have some ideas about the world, and let's learn about them. So I read Socrates and learned about the thinking of, well, really Plato, and learned about the ideas of Socrates. And so I went through that particular period of time. But since then, we've moved away from the authoritarian over to the non-authoritarian. And these right here, progressivism, is something that is a philosophical slant that basically looks at what in uh, in the world is relevant to us that we need to know. And so those things that are not relevant, we disregard. And I kind of see it in a way, because what happens is that there is so much knowledge out there that we really don't have time sometimes to look at everything. So we need to look at, the important things. One of the philosophical slants that I didn't include in here is pragmatism. And pragmatism, of course, fits very closely with progressivism, but it looks at what those really important things are going to help me in life. Um, and kind of leads then to social reconstructionism, which is basically a focus on what's important, so that we can, live as a society. And anything that we learn in science, if it helps us, uh, you know, live better, um, know things that are going to be important for us, uh, and do things that help society, we kind of look at those activities that fit under social reconstructionism. Existentialism looks at the reality of the individual. And the reality of the individual is the idea that uh, whatever it is that we learn is so that we can be individuals and be responsible. So existentialism uh, is an important part of these areas. So if you look at it here, in the philosophical alignment, as I mentioned earlier, it's a continuum, going from authoritarian to non-authoritarian, and depending on where we are in our teaching, we fit one of these areas and maybe move to that. I kind of believe that if you're a beginning teacher, essentialism is really an important uh, way of getting information out. And the only problem is that students don't really respond to it, and we are uh, working towards, in our teaching career, working through the non-authoritarian, because we know that when students get out of school, they need to take responsibility for their life once they enter the workforce, or begin to raise families. If we look more specifically at authoritarian philosophies, uh, we look at what essentialism and perennialism can do. Uh, Obviously, I said that beginning teachers really should work at the very beginning under this premise, because it gives teachers and the school systems control. And as a beginning teacher, you have to have control of your class. That's not the only thing, but it also gives you an idea of what it is that you'll need to cover. The teacher is the focus on, in this particular type of philosophies. And it's something that we see in Western thought. In other words, European, North American thought is basically based on essentialism and perennialism. Eastern thought, in uh, China and Japan and Taiwan and many other areas, don't basically look at it that way. And so teachers choose the curriculum and the activities that they're supposed to do. And just looking at it from essentialism and perennialism, essentialism really tries to look at the cultural literacy, and perennialism takes those truths that you find in the great books, and the focus is that. In fact, there were schools that basically their whole curriculum was based on the great books. Many great leaders, in the United States went to some of these schools, and it was very popular at a certain time. Non-authoritarian philosophies, such as progressivism, social reconstructionism, and existentialism, focus on the learner. And the idea is to meet the student's interests and needs. In other words, as I mentioned earlier in the authoritarian, the philosophies, the students aren't necessarily interested or focus on learning what the teacher wants for them to learn. And in this particular case, it probably works out better in order for students to get interested and advocate for their own learning if you use one of these philosophies. Of course, I have to say that in order to do that, the teacher has to be very well versed in the discipline themselves. And one of the consequences of these non-authoritarian is because everything is based more on the learner taking responsibility. And so they have to look at the things that they are reading, and they have to develop critical thinking so that they can address future problems and reach independence and hopefully at the end improve society. And it's really something that as we go older, we as adults really advocate for this. In other words, this is what it means to grow up. You don't want to be told what it is you need to learn. You want to learn things, and you want to be able to learn things that you want to learn, and then be able to use those things uh, to make your life better. Here's constructivism, and constructivism really falls under the non-authoritarian. And if you look at some of the different concepts of or different parts of constructivism, you see where it fits the non-authoritarian philosophies. In other words, students have to construct meaning from their experiences. And sometimes they are the ones that decide what it is that they are going to focus on and what experiences they're going to do. They're not left by themselves because the teacher guides the student and asks questions. And really, the most important part of a constructivist teacher is to help students construct meaning of the concepts that they are working on, and it's very important that they have well designed lessons and activities, and of everything. Uh, this is one of the areas that I really myself need to work on. We're not very good at asking very provocative questions, and it's something that we need to work on as constructivist teachers. Also, the teacher is a facilitator, and the student is the one that is actively involved in learning the ideas that they want to learn. So that's basically, the constructivist teacher. I can tell you that this is not easy, And, we move in and out of constructivism um, because sometimes we have to give instructions. And obviously, when we give instructions, we work more toward the authoritarian. So there has to be a balance in applying these different philosophical slants. Here's just talk about the two extremes, traditional and constructivist. First of all, we're going to look at the focus on the curriculum. In the traditional curriculum, the curriculum begins with the parts of the whole. It emphasizes the basic skills. In other words, we start with the small little baby steps, like learning how to count, but then working toward eventually doing more complicated mathematics skills. Or the same thing can be said in science. Constructivists work on the big concepts, and in the next slide series, we're going to talk about big ideas. And so here's where we look at these big concepts and we look at the whole. In other words, what is it that we want to get to? It's basically like Stephen Covey saying, keeping the end in mind. So that's where we start. We start with a whole, and then we expand to include all of the parts so that we can keep things relevant and we know where we're going. Otherwise, what happens that students really can't make connections and don't really understand why it is that they're learning all these basic skills to do something that later on is going to have consequences. In constructivism, you start with these big things and then include all the smaller parts. In terms of values, traditional curricula strictly adheres to fixed curriculum, and that's the most important part in a traditional curriculum. We don't deviate. We say, here's what students need to know, all of those little parts. And so we're given things like education standards, and we try to make sure that students do well in those in meeting those particular standards. Whereas in constructivist classrooms, the focus, the value, what's valued is the pursuit of students' questions, and interest is valued. Students pick what it is that they're going to consider learning, and they're more engaged than in a traditional curriculum in designing the curriculum, and that's what is valued. As far as materials and resources, well, in traditional curriculum, you use textbooks and workbooks, and in constructivist curriculum, you know, there are primary sources of material and manipulative materials, and sometimes in constructivist classrooms, students design the materials and make decisions about what materials they're going to be using, and so it's a very hands-on type of classroom. And you might want to concentrate on the word manipulative when we look at that, because basically the students are using the materials and resources to help them understand the concepts. In terms of the basis for learning, learning in a traditional classroom is based on repetition. I mean, you do large sets of multiplication tables, of addition tables, and so on. And we were all raised on that type of a curriculum. And sometimes we complain when students don't know uh, particular concepts. And whoops, I hit the and so we want to make certain that they have those skills before they move on. Uh, and in constructivist, the basis for learning is interactive. It's rooted in negotiation. It's a push and pull between what the teacher knows she needs to or he needs to do and what the students are interested in and want to do. Um, the interaction between the teacher and the student in a traditional classroom, the teacher disseminates the information and the students are the recipients of that information or knowledge. The idea is that looking at a vessel like a vase or something like that, the teacher has the information and it pours it into that vessel, and the student is basically the vessel receiving all of that information. In a constructivist classroom, the interaction is that the teacher has a dialogue with students and helps the students construct their own knowledge. That's sometimes very difficult, and it's difficult for several reasons. Teachers sometimes don't ask the right questions, or their uh, way of thinking doesn't allow for meeting the students at their level. And then sometimes students um, don't don't trust in themselves to ask the right questions, or to be able to understand things on their own. And you can see where the critical thinking really pops up in in uh, in these types of teacher student interactions. It's very important. Obviously, it's a lot easier and less demanding if the teacher gets the information and gives it to the student. And it's a lot of work to dialogue with students. Um, so the teacher's role here is in the traditional classroom directive, and it's rooted in authority. They know what it is that needs to be taught, and they design the lessons for the student. And of course, in constructivist classrooms, the role is interactive, and it's again rooted in negotiation. Assessment. In a traditional classroom, assessment is through testing. Students need to get correct answers. And if you all noticed, I had quite a number of you all asking about, I try to get you all to identify and make a choice about the different instructional models and which one would be best to develop or to remove misconceptions. Uh, I think what a lot of you all were looking for was where's the answer? The teacher or that I had to have given you all a reading or something like that to be able to solve that particular issue. Well, I didn't. I was using a very constructivist type of assessment. And, you were supposed to be looking at the different things that you read or the different things that you heard, and coming up with products. Um, and so the other thing was that it was more important for you to go through that understanding that you could come up with an answer, but you had to rely not only on yourself but possibly others to think things through. Okay. Uh, in terms of the view of knowledge, traditional classrooms, knowledge is seen as inert. Uh, it's there. It doesn't have life. You just need to know it. In constructivist classrooms, knowledge is dynamic and it's ever changing. So you might today have chosen three particular ways of removing misconceptions, uh, but in reality, you'll learn more and then make decisions about using other um, uh, ways of solving a problem. And so the in terms of the classroom, the student works primarily alone, and in constructivist classroom, students work primarily in groups. And I mean, you ask the teacher questions, but I think what I would like to see in a constructivist classroom is that you take the time to talk to others, and based on what you all are seeing and experiencing, you come up with your own solutions. Okay, so basically, here's the summary of these models. Um, the shift for a constructivist classroom is from the teacher to a student. Constructivist classrooms require that students be active learners and decision makers. Constructivist classroom teachers act as coaches. They mediate, they prompt, and they help students develop and assess their understanding of the concept. And what I said earlier, something that I always have to work on and I will always continue to work on is to become an expert questioner. It's something that we're all going to be uh, working on in our teaching career.